everybody, I'm Andy McCormick. I'm here from the Down Syndrome Association of Greater St. Louis. Welcome to our very first LEAP series workshop. Today we're going to learn all about Down Syndrome 101. Many of you already know a lot about Down Syndrome, more than I know, but we're going to talk about the very basics of Down Syndrome, the very beginning. So we're going to start today with what is Down Syndrome. Down syndrome is a genetic condition that affects 1 in every 691 births. So almost 1 out of every 700 babies is born with Down syndrome. It affects people of all ages, races, economic levels. Down syndrome loves everybody. Doesn't care where you come from or where you've been. It loves everybody equally. In the United States alone, there's over 400,000 people living with Down syndrome. The most common form of Down syndrome is called trisomy 21. It occurs when there's 3 copies of the 21st chromosome instead of 2. So people living without Down syndrome have 46 chromosomes in every single cell of their body. People with Down syndrome have 47. They have a little something extra in every cell. This extra genetic material in all those cells affects how a person with Down syndrome looks and learns, and it creates those characteristics associated with Down syndrome. So now we're going to talk about the correct way to talk about Down syndrome. Is it down, downs, down? Correct terminology is Down syndrome. Capital D, lowercase s, no apostrophes. Down syndrome was named after physician John Langdon Down. He discovered the characteristics of Down syndrome in 1866, and he named the syndrome after himself. That's why there's that capital D, lowercase s. Really important thing to remember about Down syndrome is we use person-first language. It's important to say a person with Down syndrome, an individual with Down syndrome, a child with Down syndrome, not a Downs kid, a Downs baby. We want to be really respectful of people that live with Down syndrome and their families. They really appreciate that. When a baby's born with Down syndrome, it can affect how they look and how they learn. So some of those differences can affect their health. Some of those differences are sometimes they'll have skin folds at the corner of their eyes. More often than not, they'll have a flat nose bridge, low or small set ears, curved pinky fingers, and usually a large gap between the big and second toe. Babies with Down syndrome also might have some of the following health conditions. Low muscle tone. That one's kind of tricky and people don't always understand what that means. Basically means all the muscles in the body are kind of weak or floppy. We talk about using all those muscles in your face, and you think about all the things that you do with the muscles in your face. Eating, speaking, breathing, smiling, frowning, all of those things are affected by that low muscle tone. So we want to be really conscious of that when we're talking to someone with Down syndrome. 40% of people born with Down syndrome have a heart defect, but luckily those things are mostly corrected within the first year of a baby's life, and it will not be a problem for the rest of their life. Sometimes they'll have digestive or feeding issues, and that comes back to that low muscle tone. All the muscles in your body work together to help things run. So if you have low muscle tone in your intestines, it's going to make those digestive things go a little slower or work a little harder. Sometimes people will have thyroid disease, slow or delayed growth and development. So oftentimes people with Down syndrome have a really short stature, and then usually there's some intellectual delays as well. There's some myths about Down syndrome that we like to make sure people know about because they're just not true. So one of the myths is that people with Down syndrome have severe intellectual delays. This is false. Most people with Down syndrome fall into the moderate to mild range of intellectual disability. People with Down syndrome participate in public education and private education programs just like everyone else. Another myth that we often hear about is people with Down syndrome are always happy. That's somewhat of a myth because people with Down syndrome do tend to bring a smile to everyone's face and make happy people around them. But people with Down syndrome feel all the same emotions that you and I feel. Happiness, sadness, anger, disappointment, all of those same feelings. But they do bring a lot of joy to everyone around them. Another myth is people with Down syndrome have to be placed in segregated educational systems and employment. That's false. People with Down syndrome are included in regular schools, regular academic programs, regular places of employment. They don't necessarily need their own place to work or their own school to be at. They can be included in all parts of our society. The last myth we're going to talk about is children with Down syndrome plateau. And that, of course, is false. All of us are lifelong learners. We're always learning new things and new parts of life as we go along. When you're a young newlywed, you might learn how to do the laundry if you've never done it before. Or you might learn how to pay your taxes. Same thing for a person with Down syndrome. They're going to learn things from childhood all the way through adulthood. We're all lifelong learners. So, how do people with Down syndrome learn? What are the best ways to help them learn things? So, more often than not, people with Down syndrome are visual learners. So we like to pair pictures with printed and spoken words, using terms like match, select, and name as you're learning a new topic. We also like to demonstrate, model, show, use visual cues, and then also use kinesthetic reinforcement, movement, to learn new things. Another cool thing you can do is color code or highlight things to help them learn those new things. Auditory processing and auditory memory are delayed most of the time with people with Down syndrome. So we always want to allow adequate response time. 10 seconds is kind of the rule we go by, the rule of 10. So if I ask a question to a person with Down syndrome, in my head, I want to count to 10 and wait those 10 seconds to make sure I give them enough time to process what I've asked, and then give them that time to also think of their response. I don't ever want to judge someone's ability by their ability to answer quickly or what their communication level is. It doesn't affect their intelligence. People with Down syndrome often have fewer short-term memory channels. So we like to break down directions into smaller steps, do lots of repetition. Repeat, 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 repeat. Lots of small chunks of information. Give smaller chunks, give them time to process, and then they'll understand much better. People with Down syndrome are often very literal learners. So we want to avoid things like slang or words that have multiple meanings. Sometimes that gets kind of lost in translation. They don't understand what you're saying because they didn't understand that slang. And sarcasm can get lost in that same thing. If I use sarcasm and I take you literally, it could be really tricky. And then most often than not, people with Down syndrome learn at a slower rate than their peers. So it might take them longer to learn the same task, like say tying your shoes or potty training. Those things can take longer than a typical peer. Next thing we're going to talk about is hugs. And people with Down syndrome are known for being really good huggers. And we agree that they're really good huggers and they give the best hugs. But it's really important to remember to teach when it's okay to give a hug. Sometimes it's okay to hug your friends and sometimes it's not. So thinking about when you want to give someone a hug or when it's appropriate to give a hug is the same things we need to be teaching our individuals with Down syndrome. Sometimes it's better to do a handshake, a high five, or even giving knuckles is a better solution for a hug. Now we're going to talk about the successes of people with Down syndrome. One of the really cool, my favorite part, is people with Down syndrome are living longer than ever. In 1976, the average life expectancy for a person with Down syndrome was 20 years. Today, it's over 60. It's amazing. We've really improved the quality of life and the length of life for people with Down syndrome. People with Down syndrome are living independently in apartments and residential facilities, all on their own. It's amazing. They're going to college. UMSL has a fantastic program all for people with intellectual disabilities. More often than not, people with Down syndrome are being included in the general education classroom settings. They're also doing things like acting, modeling, painting, writing, and so many more amazing things. And my favorite thing is they're working in the community. Our people with Down syndrome are working jobs at all kinds of places like insurance stores and music stores and restaurants, and the list goes on and on. I couldn't tell you all of them because there's so many amazing jobs right now in the community for our people. Today, people with Down syndrome don't live in institutions. They live at home with their families. They're active participants in the educational, vocational, and social activities in our community. They're involved in everything. They don't need to be excluded from anything. If you need more information about Down syndrome, we'd love for you to contact us at our office. You can reach us by phone, by email, by fax, or just stop in. We'd love to hear more from you. If you have any further questions, please contact us. Our website is www.dsagsl.org. Thanks, have a great day.